Welcome back to another episode of FPOG, Financial Planning for Oil and Gas Professionals. This week, episode 51, we are talking about why is it so hard for oil and gas professionals to spend money in retirement. Nathan, we work with a bunch of families in this space, and we've observed it time and time again. They often have way more money than they'll ever need, but have trouble pulling the trigger on things that they might enjoy or that their family might enjoy, or just making big purchases or treating themselves in retirement or decumulating the nest egg they've worked so hard to build. So in this episode, we're going to unpack why do we think that is? And we're also going to provide some solutions and talk about what are some strategies that you can employ to spend well in retirement. But Nathan, kick us off. Why do you think it's so hard for oil and gas professionals to spend down their money in retirement?
Sure. I think this topic is really interesting. Me coming from the oil and gas space, I have seen just some of the volatility that takes place in oil and gas industries, and whether you have experienced negative oil, massive layoffs, maybe a large bonus in certain years and less so in others. There's just a lot of volatility with oil and gas. And so trying to prepare for the good and bad times, realizing that it's never as good or never as bad as it may seem, it's really hard to assume that you can start pulling down from your accumulated assets. And so you've trained yourself to prepare for the worst, and it can be a little scary to go into a period of life where there's no income coming in, or at least a paycheck.
Yeah, I mean, just like the feast and famine mentality, I think it just does a number on you psychologically, right? Our clients do a great job of storing acorns for winter, if you will, but winter is only a season, right? And even if you save a ton, right, it's a tough psychology to break, if you will. Even if if you're retired, you're no longer contingent on that big oil and gas company to continue to pay you or to avoid layoffs, right? Like, enduring decades of that psychologically does a number on you. So I would also add that you have to abandon the behavior that has helped you, right? So if you think about like not only how these oil and gas professionals are wired of, hey, I know boom and bust is coming, the behavior that's created is, when you get a bonus, when you get a really high income year, saving lots of it. When you get a really low income year, maybe tighten the buckle with spending a little bit, right? Not only has there been this boom bust cycle, they've developed behavior that's actually served them well, right? Of like, hey, I'm systematically going to overspend or systematically underspend. If I have a big bonus year, I'm not going to extrapolate that into the future. I'm going to risk management. I'm going to diversify my company equity, right? I'm going to do as many things as I can to be prudent, right? But the problem is, the great quote of, you're not going to solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. It's almost like the same thing with retirement spending. The behavior of kind of, holding tightly to your purse and kind of doing some risk management and just prudently managing your household cash flow and balance sheet, the thing that served you well, it's got you to retirement. That's a behavior that got you to the finish line, right? You're not continuing to run the race. You're decumulating, right? You've completed the marathon, and your diet's still as though you're still training for the marathon. But it makes sense because that behavior has served them so well. It got them to the finish line. So to abandon something that served you so well and gotten you exactly to where you've wanted to go, to just let go of that it's no easy feat.
Absolutely. I would think of it as there's a certain amount of discipline that I think you're explaining there that has gotten them to where they are. I don't think you upon retirement just abandon discipline, but I think you employ that discipline in different ways. And rather than seeing that paycheck come in from your employer, you now get to employ discipline in decumulating that portfolio in a really thoughtful way that we'll talk about here in a little bit.
Yeah, I love that call out because some people might have taken that message as just spend frivolously and wildly and without a plan. And I think the lack of plan is why people feel so paralyzed. And we'll talk about that later. We're not saying abandon discipline. We're saying, hey, reconstitute what it means to be disciplined in this next season. The definitions are going to be different. So I love that.
I would also add that discipline maybe sets oil and gas professionals up for maybe a more enjoyable retirement just because they have that plan in place and and they can enjoy it really tactfully.
Yeah. I'd also say, so another reason why I think that it's hard for oil and gas professionals to spend down their portfolio is, like, I would say, the stress that comes from the moment of retirement, right? If you think about it, you've spent decades and you're leaving some of your highest earning years and you're going into the great unknown, which is retirement. And you go from some of your highest earning years to no income, right? And depending on how you take your pension, you might have some pension income. You likely don't have Social Security yet. Odds are, for the majority of people that we interact with, they go from their highest earning years to no income or a little self-employment income. But for the purposes of this, we'll say no income. That's huge. That's really difficult to stomach. And it could be decades before you get any sort of income again, be it from Social Security, that's not created from your own investment assets. And so you've gone from making the most money you've probably ever made to making no money and having to spend it down, right? And I would say just how violent that transition is and severe it is also just makes it difficult. It's not like your portfolio is only responsible for creating half of your income because of Social Security or a pension. For a lot of our people, it's the entire thing. And if you're retiring and you have kids in college, you're also probably in some of your highest spending years. So it's just kind of a perfect storm where your expenses are probably some of the biggest they'll be. You've just gone off of your highest earning years, and now you have no source of income. So not only are you drawing down from your portfolio, you're almost always drawing down exclusively from your portfolio, which is that's a tough thing to stomach.
Right. I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of uncertainty after you retire, and whether it's your paycheck or just leaving a lifestyle that you're really really familiar with. Not only is your income taking a turn, your expenses are much different. You have a lot more time on your hands, and you are trying to navigate a new lifestyle, and there's a lot of uncertainty and fear that can come from that.
Yeah, that's kind of a recurring theme, right? There's just like this pervasive sense of like newness and uncertainty, right? The newness plus the uncertainty plus the potential consequences of mismanaging your first few years of retirement due to sequence of returns. It kind of creates this high stakes, paralyzing state. And also, like, if you're a long time listener to the podcast, hey, we see the post retirement years before Social Security starts as some golden opportunities for some planning opportunities. So on top of thinking about just recreating an income in retirement, there's also kind of these high stakes financial planning years. So it's really, really an intense period, and can kind of become overwhelming. Nathan, are there any other reasons why you think it's hard in terms of framing the problem of, okay, why is it hard for this demographic to spend down their portfolio in retirement?
Yes, I think there's a component of really clarifying what a plan is, or you could call it a North Star. I think whether it be oil and gas professionals or other retirees, I think it's pretty easy to picture generally what your retirement might look like. But you might want to go on some vacations. You might want to spend some time with some family. You may have some bucket list items like that. If you consider it like the end of life, you may want to leave a considerable amount of assets to a charity or your kids, but you don't ever necessarily define what that is. And so when you think about what an income and spending plan may look like, it's really hard to get comfortable with that plan if you don't clearly define what some of those expenses look like. So I think one of the things that we would encourage all of our clients to do is just get really clear on what that North Star looks like, because I think once we know what we're trying to achieve, it's a lot easier to plan for and maybe eliminate some of that or reduce some of that fear that comes with it.
Yeah, I mean, Nathan, right? That's huge. I think like what you're talking about of like, okay, defining, okay, what is use Ramit Sethi's language, what is my rich life, right? Like what matters, but then also like defining and getting really granular about that, right? Because like, let's take an example of like, I want to do more international travel. Does that mean hella skiing in, Japan for $50,000? Does that mean, backpacking in Europe and staying in hostels for 6 months that cost 10 grand, right? And both of those are okay. And I think we have clients that might enjoy both of those with varying amounts. But right, so that's the same thing, which is like, hey, I want to do more international travel. But like that's great, that's a good first step. But then, okay, like what does that international travel actually mean, right? And of course, you're you're making your best guess at what future you will want, right? Like if you think you want to take this trip in 10 years, you might have one goal for it and then your life's going to change, or you might end up with grandkids you didn't know you were going to have. And then, Europe changes to a week in Florida with all the families and with all the extended family together, right? And so we hold these plans kind of loosely, but man, is it good just to communicate them, say, hey, what's my rich life? And then also say, okay, how much do I think these things are going to cost? Because I haven't defined it or quantified it to begin to even bring math into the picture of, hey, what do I need?
Exactly. I think the clearer we can paint that picture, the easier it is for us to achieve it. And like you said, continually changing, but we'll do our best with the information we have right now and adjust as we need to.
Yeah. So, in summary, why it's so hard, a few of the reasons we think it's so hard is the boom and bust mentality and the feast and famine, just kind of nature of oil and gas. You having to abandon or reframe the discipline and the behavior that has served you so well, the psychology of going from your highest earning years to pretty much no income, and then the lack of articulating North Star. So, okay, what does my rich life look like, and how much do I think that might cost me? So, all of those things together just make it really hard for some of our clients and for a lot of retirees, quite frankly, to spend down their assets, even if their financial plan supports them doing the things they want to do. So, Nathan, I think it'd be a terrible episode if we just stopped here and just presented the problem. So let's talk through a couple of tools or things that we've seen work to help people spend well in retirement. And for the first one I want to talk about is retirement projections, right? So this is kind of a continuation of the problem we framed in step one is, hey, what do I need? What are my goals? How much do I think these are going to cost? Just getting those down on paper and just to get an idea of where you're at and what your portfolio might support is a really good thing. And just see kind of how cash flow accumulates and decumulates. And you can enter all kinds of, our software does changes in inflation rates, investment returns, which bucket do I pull from? Do I do Roth conversions, right? You can model an infinite number of scenarios, but getting with a professional or even just doing a estimated cash flow to get an idea of, hey, in light of the potential universe of things I want to do, in the light of the universe of things that I have, is there a strong disconnect here? Am I in the ballpark? I think that's a huge thing. But I would also caution, I would add a word of caution here, right? Like when I say retirement projections, I don't just mean go to a future value calculator on Google, right? Because one of the problems with those, it assumes a linear investment returns. And we're recording this podcast in 2023. And if you've been investing for the past 5 years, you know that investment returns aren't linear. That's your lived experience. And that's always been the case. They're volatile. Some years they're up really big, some years they're down really big. But the problem is that volatility creates an annualized return that's slightly less than a linear return, right? So if you say, hey, I'm going to have 8% straight line investment returns or 8% volatility returns, those are you end up with two drastically different numbers. Because if a portfolio is down 50% and then it's up 50%, you have less than you started with, right? So just understanding the impact of volatility. And when you run these retirement projections, they should consider volatility and various spending levels. And it'll give you a range of outcomes. We call it the Monte Carlo analysis that shows you over how many different ways to get to 8% annualized are you successful. So I would say, hey, just get a retirement projection done to get an idea of, okay, how am I positioned?
Absolutely. Some of our clients, they're engineers. They come from engineering backgrounds, high fact finder. They're wired to just understand the numbers, and they get a lot of peace of mind there. So, if you are one of those people, a retirement projection is definitely it can be valuable for that reason.
Yeah, and Nathan, the thing I would add is like it's a process, not an event, right? Because for some of the reasons we talked about, of like, hey, my goals are changed, my portfolio values changed, my benefits have changed. I've decided to go back to work because turns out I don't like retirement as much as I thought. I'm pretty bored, so I'm going to work part time, right? Like, or I'm going to have grandkids, or I've decided I want to help them, give them some of their money while I'm living, right? There's a life happens, which is great, but so that's why this is like an event. So like when we say retirement projections, as your life continues to evolve, just continue to rerun this and get an idea of, okay, based on what I want today and what I think I might want in the future, how am I looking?
Exactly. And to your point about trying to define what those expenses may look like as the plan changes, tools like this can help you make those decisions and help you make an educated decision. If you the heli-skiing in Japan is not going to fit your budget, we want to see how it impacts your retirement projections and make a really educated decision at that point.
Yeah, and that's where the magic happens, right? Because like with most of our clients, they can afford to do anything they want, but they cannot afford to do everything, right? And so by doing these projections, it's powerful because to use the heli skiing in Japan, which unfortunately the client hasn't asked us to do that yet or model that into their plan, but I'm sure one will eventually. Like it's like, hey, how do I afford that? How do I make that happen? And okay, I can't based on the 10 other assumptions that we have. Okay, maybe I dial back education funding for great grandkids or my trips domestically throughout the year, right? There's tons of knobs and levers and trade-offs. Like this exercise is valuable, not just because it gives you an idea of, hey, here is what's possible, but also here are the knobs and levers I have to pull. And I could kind of build my plan around what's really important to me.
Yeah, another thing that I think is important to call out when we're thinking about tools to spend well, there's a lot of things that you can do ahead of time. And when I think about some of our clients that maybe they have a hard time spending money now, if you find that you are one of those clients or one of those retirees, potential retirees, there's an opportunity to practice. So you don't want to just enter retirement and have to turn on all the cash flow and have to figure out ways to spend your money. So one of the things that we have sometimes encouraged our clients to do is spend more now, enjoy the fruits of your labor now. And so that can oftentimes look like setting aside a reasonable number that you would feel comfortable spending now just to treat yourself and enjoy what you've accumulated. And so just practicing that and flexing those muscles pre-retirement can make it a little easier to enjoy some of the fun times of retirement.
Yeah, I love the verbiage you used of like exercising the muscle. Because like if you're if and two, right? We have clients on a spectrum. So if you're a default spender, right? Like this message is might not be for you. But if you're a default saver, which a lot of clients in our bucket are, you need to just exercise that muscle of spending. You need to practice that, right? To go back to the retirement projection analogy, we have clients who we're running retirement projections for who are, years away from retirement and they've probably gotten pretty close to funding it, right? And so the worst thing that they could do is save another bonus completely because it doesn't really move the needle in terms of how it's going to impact their life. They may end with more terminal portfolio value, but they've done everything they've needed to. So the best thing they could do today is, there's a subset of our client that's going to want to save their entire bonus. Maybe your plan commands it. Maybe it doesn't. If you're the person with the propensity to save your entire bonus, you're also probably the person with the propensity to oversave. So spend a little bit of it. And of course, that's why this plan is important because having a plan is important because it helps you feel empowered of, hey, if I only save half of my bonus for the next 20 years and all the other assumptions, how do things shake out? But I love what you're talking about, Nathan, of you gotta practice and you're not going to do this for decades and then just be able to, you know, there's a big headwind and we expressed it in the first half of this episode as to why it's difficult to do this. So positioning people and helping them flex that muscle now is a huge thing in helping them get a head start.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that it's helpful for retirees to think about is just as you're making some of those projections, plan for the worst. I know there's a lot of fear around market crashes. There's many of you that are approaching retirement, maybe caring for elderly parents that are going through some health issues that you're seeing them experience that, and you're thinking to yourself, "Wow, that would be challenging. I want to make sure that I am set up and I have plenty of money to fund end of life care, things of that nature." So model those things in a portfolio projection. Model a health shock, some poor returns for a number of years, like Jared mentioned to you earlier. Like sequencing of returns risk, it's not going to be 8% every year. So model some of the different return profiles. What else? What else would you say would be helpful to model?
Yeah. I mean, I would add, right? Like we've kind of talked a lot about this, but like quantifying the risks, right? Like a lot of people are like, hey, I'm really scared of like a health event. Like, and great. Like statistically, like a lot of people end up in a long-term care facility, right? The majority of Americans. And like, so just by beginning to understand, okay, what's the like on average, how long are people in? Okay, for women, it's just under 4 years. For men, it's over 2 years, right? And what's the average cost? Okay, it's about for a private room, it's about $7,700 a month, and those numbers are inflating it above inflation, right? So like even just by understanding those things, you could begin to understand, okay, what's the potential outlay, right? Because it's easy to think about a health event and think in the millions of dollars and get scared, but right, like these things will be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on, your situation. And there, of course, there's a wide range, but using averages to begin to get an idea and using like hard numbers to begin to get an idea of, okay, what's my potential outlay? And then the second decision becomes, okay, how do I fund this outlay? Do I have enough in taxable assets or investment assets? Am I self-insured? Or do I want a long-term care policy? Do I want a life insurance policy with a long-term care rider? And the latter, the products are usually, a lot more expensive, and they don't, unless you get an expensive cost of living rider, they don't keep pace with the cost of care. So, we'll probably have a whole nother episode related to long-term care, but just Nathan, reiterating what you're saying of, hey, plan for the worst, and really above and beyond that, like articulate it. Like, what does your plan need? What do we think is a reasonable outcome in this scenario? Is my roof going to survive, the average storm in my neighborhood, and or even the 100-year storm in my neighborhood? And just begin to kind of do that math and get an idea of that, I think is huge. I think another thing, right, is like, okay, so we talked about, okay, you got to practice, you got to plan for the worst, you got to have like articulate and calculate with a retirement projection. But like also another tool to spend well is, man, just automate, right? Like recreate a paycheck. And this is another reason why it's great to have an advisor, because there's a lot of various tax consequences between, okay, do I pull from this bucket, the taxable assets, retirement assets, Roth assets, 529, if I'm HSAs, when do I pull from all of these buckets? There's so many different places you can get money and so many different tax consequences. So this is one of those things where it really pays to have an advisor. But assuming you do, or even if you don't, figure out, okay, where does it make the most sense to pull from in light of my tax situation today and in the future? And then how do I automate that as much as possible? And I would just schedule a recurring distribution and ensure you have enough cash to pay for a few months of expenses, and then, periodically rebalance and make sure that you're raising cash. But, it's you're going to make it an uphill battle if every month you're deciding, hey, what bucket do I pull from? How much do I pull from? Figure out what you need to live off of, have a recurring distribution, and then, refill that account every few months in placing trades. And then we can launch into a whole nother tangent on, how much cash should you have? Which bucket should you pull from? But at the 10,000 foot level, plan and recreate a paycheck and just have it set up so that you're not having to make a micro decision every month of, how much can I pull out? How much should I pull out? Where should I pull it from?
Right. When we speak earlier about just the psychology of having that paycheck, having this automated, I think we do this for plenty of our clients, and it's really a helpful bridge into that retirement. And you feel like you're getting your paycheck in your bank account every year. Taxes are withheld accordingly if it's a pre-tax account, and it's really systematic. And so I think this is a great point as far as automating and making it easy to transition.
Absolutely. And so, assuming you've done all these things, I think the other tool in the arsenal to help you spend well in retirement is becoming educated, right? Like doing research on just understanding kind of how retirement spending works, right? A great example of this is there's a Kitsis article that we'll link to, and it talks about the retirement spending smile. A lot of people, when they're building projections, they'll model retirement spending linearly, but most retirees don't spend linearly. They spend really, really high amounts right when they retire, and it goes down over time, and then it picks way back up towards the end of life. And it's called the go-go years, which is right after retirement, the slow-go years, where your mobility is waning and you're getting less active, and then right at the end of life is the no-go years, which is when healthcare expenses really tick up and grow, right? So it's important to understand that, hey, if you've retired and you're spending more than you ever thought you would, there's also some seasonality to that. And your portfolio distribution rate might not be sustainable over 30 years, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. If you have Social Security that starts in 5 years, is going to cover the vast majority of your paycheck, right? So just by becoming educated, you'll be gracious to yourself and understanding, hey, I recognize this season is a more expensive one, so I'm okay with spending X now because I know it's going to be Y later on, or I think it might be Y later on based on what the research says. Um, there's also some other strategies you can use of there's dynamic distribution rates, which basically say, hey, I spend more when my portfolio is up and I spend less when my portfolio is down, right? And of course, that involves you having an understanding of, okay, what percentage of your costs are fixed or variable, and kind of having dynamic spending of, hey, I want to, if you're in a sustained market downturn, if you're in a position to tighten the belt so you're not selling at temporarily depressed prices, it's going to be good for your long-term portfolio. Or if not saying don't spend any money, but having the flexibility to dial back your variable spending in bear markets and dial it up during bull markets, that can have a really great outcome on portfolio distribution. So Michael Kitces, we reference him, I feel like, in every podcast. He also has another great article talking about that. But there's lots of strategies like that. But I think the big thing is, okay, hey, develop a plan, quantify it, okay, become educated on the opportunities, and really kind of plan for the worst and add numbers. And I think all of these things in concert over long periods of time that grow with you as you develop and your goals develop and everything develops, I think can really serve you well and help you launch on the right foot and help you spend well in retirement. Nathan, anything else you would add as we kind of wrap up?
No, those last few points that you mentioned just really highlight how dynamic this process is. And it's really an exercise, a bit of an art to figuring out, hey, this is where we're at now. This is what the plan is now. And it's going to change. And that's okay. You don't need to solve all the withdrawal rates and expenses for the rest of your lifetime. Just having some really really educational conversations with an advisor can help you just navigate this as things change. And so I think these are all great points, and hopefully our listeners found them helpful.
Awesome. Well, we thank you for tuning in. Love to hear ideas for future episodes. Podcast at brownleewealthmanagement.com. Or also send us tips or tricks on how you're spending well in retirement. Or if you're struggling to spend in retirement, we'd love to hear from you and why you think that is. These are all just us theorizing based on our client base and who we're working with. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks. We'll see you next time.